Okay, as we get started here with the cardiovascular system, you'll notice actually with the front page of your packet is a thing on taking notes, and then I gave you a copy of a student's notes that we did in the Cornell note-taking style that matches your blank on the blood vessels. We actually did this as a class activity on the board, so I'm providing you the information on the taking notes. Now this actually came from the Dartmouth College website, and then the back side of that initial template there kind of tells you what goes where, and then there's actually a sample with Professor Martin for September 14th memory notes done in the Cornell style. So what we did was we kind of practiced that using the textbook as a resource on the blood vessels. So I did that on the board. What I did was I got a copy of a student's information and I just photocopied it for you. So that should be pretty complete for you, but I didn't know if you wanted to write it kind of in your own words and do your own summary for that. The next section in terms of what we did is the heart diagram, and you can actually see that diagram here on the DVD. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take you through this, and the order that we do this in actually has to do with the order that blood travels through, into and then through the heart, and this is something that you will need to know. The other thing is that you will notice is that I've got the words color-coded for you. The blue words represent areas of the heart that contain or have passed by deoxygenated blood, whereas the red have the oxygenated blood. So the blood actually arrives at the heart here on the right-hand side. Now you've got to remember we're flipped because we're looking at it as if it's sitting in someone. And the first two areas that capture blood are the superior and inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava brings blood from the lower regions of the body, and the superior vena cava obviously from the upper regions of the body. These are the two largest veins that we have in the entire body. And at this point, the blood pressure is actually very, very low. The blood basically just kind of pools or oozes into the heart because the pressure is so low. Now the next place where it goes is the first chamber or room, so to speak, of the heart, which is the right atrium. Now again, the blood arrives there, kind of pools in there, and the right atrium is lined with muscle tissue, so when it after the atrium fills up, the muscle actually contracts and it pushes the blood through this little flap here. And this flap is actually a valve that prevents backflow of the blood, so that when it comes, it actually comes down through the heart this way, but if it tries to go back up into the atrium, it can't. And this valve is the tricuspid valve. It's also called the right atrioventricular or AV valve. After the blood passes through the tricuspid valve, it then goes into the right ventricle. And the right ventricle is actually a lot larger, and you can see the walls are much more muscular than the right atrium. That's because the ventricles actually do provide much more pumping and pushing power for the blood than the atria do. When the right ventricle contracts, the tricuspid valve actually prevents the backflow up into the atrium, and instead the blood is actually sent up and out from the heart here, this way. Now this blood vessel here actually splits into two, but before the blood actually hits that blood vessel, it passes through another valve, which is the pulmonary semilunar valve. This semilunar has to do with the shape, and just like tricuspid means that it's got basically three flaps that come together to make that valve. That prevents the blood, once it's up in this area in this vessel here, leaving the heart from coming back down into the ventricle. So the blood comes up, and then this one, what's happened in this picture is actually rotated, so it's kind of twisted. So the blood actually kind of splits. One part goes this way, and one goes underneath that arch there and back this way. Those are the left pulmonary artery and the right pulmonary artery, and that carries blood out to the lungs. Now, in this case, we've got an artery that actually carries oxygen-poor blood. It's the only case of that in the entire body, but that's also one of the reasons why you can't say as a characteristic of arteries that they carry oxygen-rich blood, because that does not happen. After the blood travels to the lungs, it drops off its carbon dioxide and then picks up its oxygen, and it has to come back to the heart. The blood at this point actually has slowed down a lot because it's gone through capillaries there for gas exchange to take place. If it tried to go through the rest of the body, it actually would not make it back to the heart to get pumped. So it comes back to the heart to get pumped again, so it would have enough pressure to make it all the way through, down to your piggy toe and back up to your heart. It comes back to the heart on either side through the left and right pulmonary veins. And you will notice here we have veins that are oxygen rich because they're coming back from the lungs. Both sets, both the left and right, they come and they meet and they provide blood to the left atrium, okay, the upper chamber of the heart there on the left-hand side. Blood then passes down through the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve that's got actually 3 names because it's also the left AV valve. The blood then travels down into the left ventricle, and the left ventricle is the most muscular chamber of the heart. You can see how thick those walls are because that is the chamber that's responsible for pumping blood to the entire body. So it really needs to give the blood a really big push. The right one is muscular, but remember, the blood's only going to the lungs, so it doesn't need as forceful of a push as it does when it's going to the entire body. After the blood gets pumped through the left ventricle, it then travels through the aortic semilunar valve. Okay, again, prevents backflow back into the left ventricle. And then the blood actually kind of goes up and behind that pulmonary vein there, or pulmonary artery, I'm sorry, up into this archy area there, which twists around and goes back down behind the heart. This is the ascending aorta, also known as the aortic arch, and then as it flips around and goes down, that is the descending aorta. Now, there's a couple of other notes on this that I want to make here really quickly. The first has to do with the sounds, okay? Typical heartbeat makes what we call, oops, let me get my pen going, makes a lub-dub sound, okay? And that actually relates to the sound of the valves as they close. The lub sound is the AV valves, whereas the dub sound are both of the sets of the semilunar valves. There's one more area on the heart, and this is this tip here of the heart. This is called the apex of the heart. And then this wall that actually divides the left and the right ventricles is referred to as the septum. Now the atria and the ventricles basically each have their own function as well. The atria function to receive blood, whereas the ventricles, their main function is to pump the blood. And I think for this section, we are done. You do need to know the heart sounds and what they correspond to. You do need to understand the functions of both the atria and the ventricles. And you do want to make sure that you add both the septum and the apex to your diagram. In the next section, what we're going to be talking about is, let me just take a quick peek here. We're actually going to be talking about blood pressure as well as how things change in the heart between before we're born versus after we're born.